It is 10 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. A massive oil tanker carrying Iranian crude is navigating one of the most strategically vital shipping corridors on the planet. Without warning, the captain picks up an urgent broadcast cutting through the radio frequency. United States naval forces are issuing a direct order: turn this vessel around immediately. This is no warning shot, no rehearsed exercise. This is a fully operational, actively enforced naval blockade, the first one America has executed in decades, and in that single moment, the world shifted on its axis. This is not a scenario pulled from a war game. This morning, that blockade became reality. What follows will explain precisely why this one decision carries the power to cripple the Iranian economy from the inside out, redirect the entire global energy supply chain, place China in an agonizing strategic dilemma, and either deliver the most significant peace agreement the Middle East has seen in a generation or ignite a conflict with consequences none of us are fully prepared for. Here is what actually happened and what it means beyond the headlines. United States Central Command officially confirmed that beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on April 14th, American naval forces commenced enforcement of a full maritime blockade targeting all vessel traffic moving in and out of Iranian ports. The language was deliberate and precise. The blockade applies to ships of every nationality attempting to enter or depart Iranian coastal territories, covering all Iranian port access points along the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Crucially, CENTCOM clarified one key boundary: vessels simply passing through the Strait of Hormuz between non-Iranian destinations remain free to do so. If your tanker is bound for Saudi Arabia, the way, or Iraq, you sail unobstructed. If your destination is Iran, you reverse course. President Trump had initially described this in far more sweeping terms during a Fox News appearance just before the announcement, framing it as a total, unconditional blockade. CENTCOM's formal statement pulled that back somewhat, but the damage to Iran's economic lifeline remains catastrophic regardless of the framing. Consider the numbers carefully because they tell the story better than any political statement could. Every single day, Iran pushes approximately $270 million worth of goods through maritime trade routes. Roughly $140 million of that figure is crude oil. The remaining $80 million represents non-oil exports: petrochemicals, raw metals, minerals, and steel. Every category moves by sea. On the import side, Iran brought in nearly $58 billion worth of goods last year, translating to approximately $160 million flowing in daily, covering consumer products, industrial components, and the raw materials keeping Iranian manufacturing alive. All of it is now in jeopardy. Monthly export losses for Iran are projected to reach $8 billion. That is not an inconvenience, that is an economy-ending figure. When raw material imports dry up, factory floors go silent. When factories shut down, workers lose their income. And when that happens inside a country already sitting on years of economic frustration and simmering public anger, the consequences for the ruling regime become existential. That is where part 2 begins, because the clock is already ticking, and Iran may have far less time than its officials are willing to admit publicly. Here is the detail that Iranian officials are most desperate to keep out of public conversation. Time is actively working against them, and the mathematics are brutal. Iran's total oil storage infrastructure holds somewhere between 50 and 60 million barrels at maximum capacity. At this precise moment, roughly 60% of that capacity is already occupied. That leaves approximately 20 million barrels of usable space remaining. Meanwhile, Iranian oil fields are pumping out around 1.5 million barrels of crude every single day. Run those numbers forward and the conclusion is unavoidable: within approximately 2 weeks, every remaining barrel of available storage space is completely exhausted. What happens next is where the real damage begins. Iranian oil companies will have no option but to physically shut down active wells, and unlike a light switch, oil wells do not simply turn back on at full capacity. Every forced shutdown permanently destroys between 5 and 10% of that well's future extraction potential. That revenue does not get delayed, it disappears forever from a government treasury that is already running dangerously thin. This is not merely an economic crisis, it is a countdown timer, and the regime in Tehran understands exactly what it means. Iran's public response has oscillated between outrage and thinly veiled desperation. Military spokespeople declared the blockade illegal under international law. Parliamentary security officials dismissed it as an elaborate bluff. One commission spokesperson went further, warning that Iran possesses unrevealed strategic options and telling Washington to acknowledge defeat and stop demanding at the negotiating table what it could not achieve through military force. Remarkable language, but consider its source. This is the same government that spent months launching unprovoked attacks against civilian cargo vessels flagged by countries that had absolutely no involvement. In this conflict, a Thai-flagged merchant ship was targeted by Iranian forces. Thailand, a nation thousands of miles removed from this dispute. Beyond the attacks, Iran was quietly imposing transit fees of up to $2 million per vessel simply for passage through the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway that belongs to the entire international community under established maritime law. Iranian lawmakers themselves confirmed these tolls were very real and actively collected. So the accusations of piracy and illegal conduct directed at Washington ring particularly hollow. Now here is the dimension of this developing situation that most mainstream analysis is completely failing to address, and it may ultimately prove to be the most consequential factor of all: China. Nearly the entirety of Iran's oil export volume flows directly into Chinese markets. This accounts for somewhere between 11 and 13% of China's total oil import requirements. Factor in unofficial shadow fleet arrangements operating beneath the surface of formal trade records, and that figure climbs even higher. But Iran is only one piece of China's Gulf energy dependency. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the Kuwait, and Oman all ship their oil through the Strait of Hormuz as well. Combine every source and you arrive at a staggering conclusion: approximately 50% of China's entire national oil supply depends on that single waterway remaining open and functional. And who shut it down? Iran did, not the United States. Washington has been explicit and consistent on this point. The blockade targets only vessels bound for Iranian ports. Every other Gulf shipment moves freely. The disruption to Chinese energy supply is a direct consequence of Iranian mines, Iranian tolls, and Iranian military aggression, not American. Naval positioning. This places Beijing in an extraordinarily uncomfortable corner. China needs Iranian oil, but far more critically, China needs the entire Gulf supply chain functioning. Reports from just days prior confirmed that Beijing had already begun applying quiet diplomatic pressure on Tehran, playing a key behind-the-scenes role in organizing the Islamabad talks. Every additional day the strait remains compromised is another day China's energy security erodes further. That pressure from Beijing is not going away, it is intensifying. 21 hours. That is how long representatives from both sides sat inside a conference room in Islamabad, negotiating what could either become the most significant diplomatic agreement in a generation or the final conversation before something far darker unfolds. The American delegation was led by Vice President G. D. Vance. Facing him across the table was Mohammed Baker Kalibaf, Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, accompanied by a delegation reportedly numbering close to 100 officials. Despite the scale of the gathering and the extraordinary length of the session, no agreement was reached. But what was revealed inside that room tells us everything about where this crisis is genuinely headed. Washington presented 6 firm conditions. First, Iran must completely cease all uranium enrichment activity. Second, every major enrichment facility must be permanently dismantled. Third, all existing highly enriched material must be fully retrieved and removed. Fourth, the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened without any tolling conditions whatsoever. Fifth, a comprehensive regional peace framework involving allied nations must be established. Sixth, all financial support and operational backing for proxy forces, including Hezbollah and the Houthis, must end entirely. Notably absent from this list was any demand regarding Iran's ballistic missile program, apparently set aside deliberately to preserve any remaining space for agreement. Despite the enormous gap between both positions, Iranian officials reportedly showed genuine willingness to at least engage on the nuclear question. That alone represents a meaningful shift from previous postures. However, a deeper structural problem emerged that exposed just how fractured Iranian decision-making has become internally. Nobody in that room had the authority to say yes. Vice President Vance confirmed he contacted President Trump approximately 6 times throughout the marathon session. The Iranian delegation, by stark contrast, was reportedly too paranoid about communications security to make equivalent calls back to Tehran. They feared their transmissions were being monitored and their locations tracked. A delegation of nearly 100 people, and not one individual carried sufficient authority to commit to anything. This reveals two simultaneous truths. The Iranian regime is so deeply fragmented and institutionally paralyzed that it could not maintain secure communications during the single most consequential diplomatic moment it has faced in years. But equally important, the process itself is not finished. Those proposals traveled back to Tehran. Whoever holds genuine decision-making authority there, whether Supreme Leader Khamenei, senior ERG commanders, or some combination of both, is now reviewing exactly what Washington put on the table. Meanwhile, the broader international picture continues shifting rapidly. French President Macron announced preparations for a multinational freedom of navigation mission through the Strait. European Union energy costs have already climbed over €22 billion since hostilities began. Brent crude is hovering near $100 per barrel, a 40% increase driven almost entirely by Iranian actions. American Energy Secretary Chris Wright acknowledged openly that prices will likely continue rising until meaningful shipping traffic is restored. Iran's parliamentary speaker responded by posting a photograph of American gas station prices on social media, taunting Washington with predictions of $5 fuel. Bold words from a government whose oil storage fills completely in under 2 weeks, whose wells face permanent damage shortly after, and whose economy depends entirely on a maritime trade network it can no longer reliably access. The United States is not the country running out of time here. Iran is. The diplomatic window remains technically open. Pakistan continues mediating. China continues applying pressure from the sidelines. The ceasefire has not formally collapsed, but every hour that passes without a credible counterproposal from Tehran is an hour Iran cannot recover economically. The path forward exists, whether the people holding power in Tehran possess the clarity and the courage to take it. That is the only question that matters now.